everyone. How are you? It's great to see so many of you here joining us today. My name's Kaya Saha Chaudhary and I'm the Evidence and Practice Lead for PLACE. I'm very happy to say I won't be doing this session alone and I'll be joined by my great colleagues here at PLACE. Before we get started today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that I am coming from today, of the Wangal people, and also to extend that to all the traditional owners of the lands that we are all coming from today, and that I pay my deepest respects to elders past and present, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. If you haven't already, I would really encourage you to put the lands that you are coming from today into the chat, because it's always great to see the diversity that we are all coming from in these conversations. So a little bit of a recap for those who were not in our last session. As you saw, today is the second PLACE in Practice session, and this is one of our few touch points that we'll have to bring people together for a 1-hour session to talk about resources, but also the how and the practices of what makes this work possible, and a place for us to connect and share. And in the first one, we talked about we introduced the 12 elements framework, which you can see on the left. And that was a combination of things PLACE has collected that really impacts how place-based change can happen. And on the website and on our PLACE in Practice page, you can see, you can find the video link to the last recording, also to the framework and other resources. And in that last discussions, we asked you about which of the 12 elements you were finding most important to your current work. And something that came up prominently both in the chat as well as in the responses to the questions was about being responsive to local context and valuing local knowledge, which we know is really important and crucial to making sure decisions are made as close as possible to communities on the ground. So taking that in mind, that is what we decided that today's session would be on. And next slide, thanks. And so before we get into the meat of it, just some normal housekeeping rules. You'll see that the chat function is available and we'll be using it later to share experiences, to ask questions. We will also have an interactive poll using Slido. So it's always handy to have your phone ready. That will be coming up in a bit. And we'll drop the link and the QR code in the chat. There will be a survey at the end, but as always, this is really about, we are learning, growing in this process, about collecting feedback, what you would like us to talk more about, how we can improve. So really encourage you to fill that in. And just as always, to keep microphones switched off unless you are speaking, and that there will be time for Q&A towards the end. You've also probably seen, as I have, a lot of pop-ups coming on my screen just to say that this session is being recorded and transcribed, and this is, so yeah, you'll see that coming up there. Just let us know if any issues there. So like I said, I won't be doing this alone today. And so my colleagues from PLACE that will be sharing alongside will be Brenda Rahman, our Strengthening and Practice Lead. Brenda, if you want to give a wave. We've got Jane Anderson, our Director of the Enable team. And then Patrick Cook, our Data Systems Lead. I'll give them the introductions they deserve as we get closer. So if we go to the next slide, today's agenda is kind of going to be in 3 parts. So like we said, 2 elements really emerged in the discussion. So we'll look first at being responsive to local context, what that looks like and means from what we've heard, and then have an example shared as well from Jane. And then we'll move on to valuing local knowledge, and again have both a bit of what we're learning and capturing, and then what an experience sharing. And then we'll turn over to everyone in the room. As we know, there's always such a wealth in this room of people working in this space to share some of the experiences as well and exchange that they've had. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleague, Brenda, to take us through being responsive to local context. Over to you, Brenda.
Hi everyone, I'm Brenda and I'm the Strengthening Practice Lead here at Place, and I'm just going to very quickly give an overview of responsive to local context, a quick summary before we get into the practical examples. So being responsive to local context is very much a practice, and so today I'm going to summarise this practice into 3 steps. The first step is about listening before acting, and this might seem really obvious, but it's really natural for us to try to go straight to solutions. So starting with who has lived experience is so important in understanding local context. The history, the culture and systems are all influenced by this lens that you look through. And lived experience is the real and deep expertise. So it's so important for us to listen to as much diversity of lived experience as possible. So think about, are you relying on your own perspective or the perspective of one person or a small group who have a particular view? Understanding this local context is very much about trying to get as many diverse perspectives as possible. Seek out those quiet and dissenting voices as well as the strong and confident ones. Otherwise, you risk missing the mark. Learning from the past, take the time to build the trust and really understand what's happening in this place. The second step is really about adapting, being flexible, evolving as the relationships deepen over time. And as you learn more and more about what works in this place, and let go of all of those one-size-fits-all approaches, even if they're really, really good, and being prepared to adapt them to what's going to work here in this community. And shaping initiatives about what really matters to this community that you're working in. And the third step is the response. So, we know that there will be better decisions and actions if we really understand and respond to the local context. So this might be where to start, what pace you move at, who to involve, and how things work around here. If you have that shared understanding, then you're much more likely to have a way that stakeholders can all connect and work together and get behind a community-led plan for change. So today I just invite you to reflect on your own place and think about the 2 questions that are on the screen, and we're going to have time afterwards to reflect on these together. How are you already adapting to local context, and what makes it hard to respond to local context? So to bring this to life, I'm going to now hand back over to Kaya and Jane to walk us through a practical example.
So much, Brenda. Yeah, I'd like to invite Jane Anderson now to share with us. Jane's our director of the Enable team at Place, focusing on supporting and strengthening initiatives looking at those working in place-based work. Prior to that, she was the Latrobe Health Advocate, and that was appointed to be an independent and trusted voice of the community looking at health and wellbeing in Latrobe Valley after the Hazelwood fires in 2014. So thank you, Jane, for joining us. Jane, I really wanted to get you to share the local context about what the relationship was like between the community and the government after the fires, and then how did that affect your role as a health advocate in how you went about engaging and the work with communities. Over to you, Jane.
Thanks very much, Karen. It's great to be here and a part of this conversation. I would like to start by acknowledging the Brayakalong people of the Gunai-Kurnai Nation, whose land I'm on at the moment. And probably just to start with, it might be helpful for people to understand a little bit about Latrobe Valley, where it is. So it's in regional Victoria, a couple of hours east of Melbourne, and has a strong history in energy production, and is now currently in a transition because there's a number of coal mines in Latrobe Valley, and those coal mines are closing as a nation we're transitioning to renewable energy. So when I was appointed as the Latrobe Health Advocate, I have to say the relationship was pretty poor between the community and government. So it was the appointment of the advocate role was because of people's experience at the time of the mine fire. And the mine fire went for 45 days, and the township of Morwell, population of around about 30,000, Latrobe City is about 75,000, the population were engulfed in smoke for those 45 days. And they didn't feel as though their experience was being heard or acknowledged by the government. And the advice that was being provided by the government about how to protect their health, they didn't feel like that was in response to their experience, because they didn't feel as though they were being heard. So it was certainly a relationship of mistrust when I was appointed in the role. The other thing to note too around establishment of the advocate role is that it was established because there was the need for a voice for the community. It was also because the health and wellbeing outcomes in Latrobe City local government area were poorer in comparison to other local government areas. And there has been and is a history of experience of generational disadvantage in Latrobe Valley. So a number of things that were playing into the context of people's lives and their experiences. I worked in Morwell at the time of the mine fire, so I was aware of how people experienced it and what they were saying. So it did mean for me that it was really important to establish a relationship of trust, but particularly to hear from people in the community who weren't ordinarily heard. And it was interesting, when I started in the advocate role, people talked about consultation fatigue, and I'm sure plenty of people have heard about that term. What I found is that reaching out to people where they were, there actually wasn't a fatigue within the community. I ended up talking about a consultation frustration within the community, because they weren't being heard. They were being asked the same questions that they'd been asked time and time again, and there'd been no change as a result. So there were a number of assumptions that people had in relation to the community's experience. The issue of consultation fatigue, people assumed that people in Latrobe didn't want to improve their health and wellbeing. So they were all factors that I needed to take into account around how I could build the trust for people in Latrobe, how their voice could be heard, and how the service system did respond to that.
Thanks, Jane. And I think you're sharing, like, we know that often we come in with an initiative, we think it's, new, we can start afresh, but coming in knowing that history, how did that affect your engagement work then?
Yeah, so there was a few things that we did. First of all, and people see that engagement model there, what we did is we actually worked with TAXI, the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, to do research on engagement models elsewhere, and particularly where they had a focus on people's health and wellbeing improving through the engagement itself. So people having a voice can improve people's health and wellbeing. So we did some research, and then we worked with the community to develop the engagement model. So this engagement model that people can see here now was a result of working with the community, working with those in the service system. And what we found is that it was really important to plan and do our research before we went and heard from people in the community and sought to hear what their experiences were, and then influence the service system on that basis. So we found it was really important to do our research, so people weren't being asked the same question that they'd been asked before, and that we could build on the community voice that had already been voiced and potentially not heard as well. So that was important for us to build on what is being said, and then engage in a way that was allowing people to have a voice who wouldn't ordinarily have a voice, and also engaging with intent. So my role was to hear from people around their health and wellbeing goals, but I was very open in my mind around what I would hear from people. So it was deliberate, but then open-minded.
Jane, I think it meant you were riding the bus, if that's right, and going, taking different approaches, right? And I know just because we've got 2 minutes and we could still talk about this, but also I think you said the community started to respond differently as well, right, as a result.
Yeah, that's right, Kay. So I was known as the woman on the bus because we knew there were communities on the buses. And so the people on the buses didn't necessarily recognise their own voice or have their own voice. So actually, a secret of it was that most of the conversations happened at the bus stop. So you actually had a captive audience because people are waiting for the bus. So it was reaching out to people where they were to hear about their health and wellbeing goals. And what we saw over the number of years, and there was a number of people and organisations contributing to the work, is that the community voice became louder and louder and it became more influential. People then felt as though there was value in having their voice, so more people were speaking out. And we saw changes to how services were provided as well. So access to doctors was a priority for people in the community, and we saw the Primary Health Network change their commissioning. So they were commissioning co-design models. We saw different models that were being developed. We had a virtual physiotherapy clinic that was provided for people in the Trobe so they could access services in a different way. And then digital connectivity hubs were built because not everyone had digital connectivity. So a range of different things happened in response to the community's voice, and the community voice became louder and more influential.
Thanks so much, Jane. That's another great example of what Brenda has been to in terms of how people are looking at it through the lens of their experience. And if we're not addressing that or intentionally engaging, it can really impact the quality of the work that we're doing. So we're now going to open to a poll, and thanks again, Jane, for your inputs, that similarly goes to, and this is on Slido, so this is a chance, I'll give you a minute, but explain the question, and to look at which aspects of context are most important in your work. And this is recognising, we always say, as Brenda was saying, it is not one size fits all, and how these different aspects of context will play out in a community will also vary. So there's no right answers, but it's to show and think about what is it impacting our community and maybe see the commonalities that we have despite how different our local context is. So you are able to scan. Let us know if you're having any troubles in the chat. And do keep any questions you have for Jane, because we will come back to that later. Okay, if we go to the poll. Yep, thanks, Sam. Yeah, really interesting that we're looking at who in the community, including elders, has that voice, is something that a lot of people are considering. As that can really shape what works. Oh, it's moving fast. Okay. So also equally, yeah, organizations, people's looking at lessons from past policies work, as we were saying, the cultural diversity. Right. Very much so, yeah, influencing community members. Yeah. Important institutions as well in the area. And I think, again, this highlights with us that exchange that we do have commonalities we can share in how we're adapting to these various local contexts, even though it might be very unique in each of our different settings. Okay, we'll keep that going then, and you can still fill in if you haven't had a chance. I can see that it's 29 of people so far, but if you want to come in and continue, please do so. And with that, we'll go to our next element for discussion, which is valuing local knowledge, and I'll hand over back to Brenda.
Hi again, everyone. So let's talk about valuing local knowledge. Local knowledge is also a practice. Valuing local knowledge is also a practice. It's about creating ways for local people, residents, community leaders, local organisations to inform priorities and influence the design and guide the work that you're doing and how it evolves over time. And at the heart of this is really the question, who is the expert? So including lived experience, cultural knowledge and place-based insight is really a critical form of expertise in place-based change. It's not something that sits alongside professional and technical knowledge, but it's actually a deep part of it. And I want to use the example of I worked with a group of elders in Yuendamu Northern Territory, the Malpajunga, and this group of women were developing a model for working together to improve outcomes for very young children in their community. And they developed their own model of working in partnerships with families or working together. And I just want to acknowledge that this is their thinking, Malpajunga, and especially the work of Jean Napanunka Brown, who was a leader in this work. And what they did was they thought about who has the knowledge in their local community. And they said families have a deep knowledge of their own child. They have a deep knowledge of their own family, and they have lived experiences of bringing up their children in this community. They also said that professionals and service providers have knowledge, but their knowledge is a broad knowledge. So families had the deep knowledge, service providers had a broad knowledge from their experience of working with many children and families and all the research and learning and evidence that they were bringing into practice. And then there was a third group of knowledge holders, and these were the elders in the community. Elders have their deep knowledge about their language and their culture that they could bring, and a broad knowledge of the history and the wisdom that was passed down to them. So the idea of bringing these three types of knowledge together to work together is incredibly powerful, and to make decisions which are shaped at the intersection of these three types of knowledge are going to be so effective. So in Yuendamu, there were a few people that had all these three types of knowledge because of their life circumstances. They were in all three groups, and so it absolutely made sense to listen to them. So this idea of valuing local knowledge, it's about much more than consultation. It's about collecting stories. It's isn't just about collecting stories and running engagements, but it's also embedding local insight into the structures of decision-making and processes of decision-making, and allowing it to actually shape and evolve over time and change the direction or pace or focus of the work. So some considerations for practice are to think about power and being honest about the power dynamics that are at play, whose knowledge is being privileged, whose gets translated, and is there some knowledge that's getting ignored? And also, secondly, to think about the ways of valuing knowledge. So are you paying people? Are they involved in the governance setup? Are they given time? Are we giving credit for the knowledge that they're sharing and bringing? And how is it being protected? But maybe the biggest way of valuing that knowledge is to actually respond to it and see that it's influencing your way forward. And third, I just wanted you to consider that it is high effort to do this really well, but it's also highly rewarding. When local knowledge is genuinely valued and acted on, your initiatives are going to be more relevant, and you'll have more trust, and it will more likely to lead to change. So as you listen to Patrick in the next section and his reflections, I invite you to think about your own work and invite you to consider, where is a local knowledge already shaping decisions in meaningful ways, and where might it still be treated just as input rather than expertise? So I'll hand back over to you, Kaya and Patrick.
Thanks very much, Brenda. And yes, to bring this to life, I'd like to invite my colleague, Patrick Cook. Patrick is a Kalkadu and Gungalita man. He's coming to us from Cubby Cubby land today in Queensland. He is the founding director of Mona Aboriginal Cooperation and also our data system leads at Place. And Patrick has extensive experience in translating complex systems into practical culturally grounded pathways rooted in the Indigenous data sovereignty and self-determination. And I'm really excited to get your perspectives, Patrick, on, in your experience, what it looks like and what it means to value local knowledge. So over to you, Patrick.
Kaya, thank you, Brenda and Jane. As Kaya was mentioning, that I've come from, I'm on Cubby Cubby land at this moment. I suppose everyone's got a story. So Mona Aboriginal Corporation was established in 2008. We lost our nephew through suicide. So we sat around the table, me and my brothers, and we established and we developed up our Mona Aboriginal Corporation named after our late mother. So it was based around our knowledge in the sense of what knowledge have we got to share and partake and develop into a program to support our community in moving forward. So we're 100% Indigenous owned, Indigenous run. So basically, what our knowledges were. The next slide, Sam. Thanks. Yep. Our knowledge, and what we do is our knowledge was never lost. It was carried through country, through family, through every season. So it's all about knowledge, is all about the land as our teacher. It also holds and memory to it too as well. So you're knowing your place, caring for each other. It's around passing knowledge on into the future. So the Mona Aboriginal Corporation established a number of programs and projects moving forward in a sense. And what we had to do was we basically had to walk in two worlds. So walking in one world in our on country, it was around country guides our decision. We looked at elders, to the land, to kinship, not just to the funding agreements. We carry custodial responsibility. Our programs answer to ancestors and grandchildren, not just the reporting cycle. So from an Indigenous perspective, when you're establishing a program, it carries on from generation to generation. Your name, your person, and along those lines. So it's a big responsibility when you're walking in that world. The knowledge that shapes your work, it comes back to being on country, being a part of country, and it starts from country at the end of the day. And then walking in the next world, in the wider world, we can write a grant, we can run a board, we can work within the government sectors, and then come home to country at any given time. We bring ourselves with us. When we walk into a meeting in a partnership, we carry ourselves with knowledge and culture with us. So knowledge is pretty much, valuing knowledge comes in so many different ways and aspects with regards to that. Knowing your community, walking within your community to develop some of those programs moving forward. And when we're developing programs, and it probably goes on to the next slide, Sam, when you click onto that one, it sort of looks like this. So what we established was an on-country youth program. So then the need was out there around that. Our KPI was 50 youth. We ended up with 168 kids on our program. From that, it wasn't about the KPI at the end of the day. It was about valuing the community in the sense, knowing what our knowledge can do and share within the community perspective. We're about establishing on Banker West Station around their multiple enterprises and economic development, but that's walking in the non-Indigenous world. But what it also does is bring people back to country and working on country that suits them. We're about also establishing a registered training organisation that will actually deliver in the non-Indigenous world training and training aspects around that, but valuing the local knowledge moving forward around that perspective around that. How do we capitalize the data or the technology nowadays? That's what the digital country platform that we're establishing too is around the protection of our knowledge, creating our knowledge along those lines and sharing our knowledge moving forward. And again, walking in partnerships, one of the successful ones was when we walked together was around the Mount Isa Indigenous Rodeo Championship. We took a program over here that actually was about community driven. So we changed it, moved it up, got onto partnerships, and then it was actually the impact into the communities moving forward. So what that meant was taking not only the program, but looking at a bigger scope of things that how can we actually bring the community along for the ride as well. So we took that group of boys from the Youth Justice One Country program behind the chutes, worked behind the chutes with these young people. That then inspired the the partnership arrangement to establish the first Indigenous Radio Championship, which then created Indigenous businesses, which then created an impact into the community. So valuing just one little program and the knowledge within that program, rolling that out into the next areas. So where to from here? So basically for us, it's about staying grounded in country. That's the major focus around that. What does that look like in that? And sharing knowledge on our terms at the end of the day. It's not about an imposing, hey, give us that knowledge. No, it's about sharing. We want to share that knowledge with you. And everyone forgets the young ones. You've got to train, you've got to work with the young ones and build their capacity moving forward along those lines. So I know this was fast and quick and along those lines, but this whole process took over 15 to 16 years to establish this process. It was a long journey. It wasn't just an overnight success. So it was very, very interesting in that sense. So, and it's all about empowering our youth of today for tomorrow. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Patrick. And that was really great. And I think really highlighted the importance of valuing with our First Nations colleagues, the importance of that walking in two worlds always and respecting that and providing that space for us. And as you can see, you're getting lots of claps and things, and you do have a couple of minutes. So I don't know if you want to add or have a further reflection on what we can do to be better at valuing and making sure we are valuing that local knowledge, beyond that respect. And like I said, extending across the whole process, right? Not just at consultation or not just at local knowledge.
That's correct, yeah. So it's valuing that local knowledge. It's how you implement that local knowledge and support the local knowledge and grow the local knowledge as well. There's all of these different aspects around the knowledge systems and walking and working in both worlds at any given time with the knowledge in the Indigenous area. It's about sharing the knowledge of what we've learned from a Western context, walking in the Western context. It's sharing the cultural knowledges within that framework. So there's to and fro's within that area, and it's not an easy journey. It's pretty hard at any given time. So, but it's always about. I always believe it's about sharing and sharing that knowledge around, and knowledge is power at the end of the day. So you need to really value it.
100%, Patrick. Thanks. And it's about doing things differently. So thank you for that. And thanks for sharing. I see in the chat, like I said, if you have questions, we will come to that. But first, we want to come as well to you because we know, again, there's a lot of experience in our virtual room. And maybe reflecting on what you've heard and your own to think about an example where a local context or local knowledge has made a real difference to a decision in your initiative, or a challenge you faced when trying to integrate it. So both, either or. Great, thank you. I see that we do have some people who have, now more coming in, but I might start if, Donna, it's up to you if you want to unmute and maybe share a bit. You're talking about, Donna's been talking about listening to local community groups to better understand the barriers to participation. And then Linda, I am losing the chat, was talking about some of the transport issues and how that was affecting young people getting involved in activities. Did Donna or Linda want to come up? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Coming to you from beautiful Yorta Yorta Waka, now known as Greater Shepparton. I work with Women Can Australia. We're a small not-for-profit that supports women to re-engage with the workforce after some time out. And one of the things that we've, with the change of strategic plan with our new CEO, we've done is understand and listen more intentionally to our local community, that is Greater Shepparton. And so those conversations around relationships, building relationships with key industry organisations, umbrella groups, industry employers themselves, and then also the women that we serve, recognising and hearing them tell us that transport is such a significant issue for them accessing employment. What we've done with that is we've actually created driving programs that support women to gain their driving licence. So they are direct responses to our understanding community and engaging in those ways.
Thanks so much, Donna. And interestingly, Linda put a similar reflection as well about the importance. Linda, I don't know if you want to come in. I'm seeing we've also got Cassandra talking about, Cassandra talking about working collaboratively across community to transfer ownership of a conversation. Did you want to come in and explain we were allowed to reframe the context and outcome of the way local council was thinking and demonstrated by policies and infrastructure? There's some really great examples coming up in the chat now. Don, interesting. I was in another initiative also that was talking about the criticalness of the transport and being such a barrier. So it's really, and finding ways to overcome that. So I think that's something a few in the room probably as well dealing with, addressing. Just put your, if anyone does want to speak to their example, I am going to suggest if you put your hand up, because that might be easier for me to see.
Oh, cool. Great. So if anybody else wants to speak, that's fine. But just quickly on the transport ads, that is coming up as quite an issue. I know that is a really, really common issue. So I've mentioned a couple in my comments there. And I just wanted to speak to the one that was a challenge where I actually was involved in this from the government side of things. So government programs and grants program that had some detailed guidelines that have been drawn up and painstakingly done with some co-design and input. But when it came to the crunch, looking at the applications for funding that came forward, there were a few there that were really about getting access to early childhood education and care for communities, which is so important. But getting funding for a minibus was just not part of those guidelines. So it's like it's so important from that system perspective to actually get that fed back and to make changes to those things so that those barriers are not there to funding. So I just want to mention that one.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. And I think that sometimes if we're not listening, what we think would be issues may not be what's actually coming up. So that really importance of deep listening. Jess, I think, has her hand up as well.
Thank you, Kay. I was just reflecting a lot on this current water resilience project that I'm running at the moment when hearing everyone speak. And for context, it was all around supporting local households to better combat water scarcity in their region. And the whole purpose was about empowering local households to understand where they're at with water efficiency in their home, and then to understand what they can do through actions to improve that. And going into it, I was blissfully ignorant and really, I think, naive as to the level of impact I could have in the six-month window that I had. And also just the barriers, going back to the earlier question around institutions that have actually caused harm and disadvantaged a lot of nuanced and diverse communities across that particular region that we were working in. And I kept feeling called to do this research and really understand from the grassroots level, but there was a inner knowing that it would probably cause more harm than good, because we just didn't have access to the levers and fulcrums that could actually lead to the change that was needed. So a really difficult decision was made to try and do everything that we could, but be very mindful of avoiding and mitigating further harm. So yeah, this whole session has been very fruitful and just my own reflections. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. It's sometimes, isn't it, what you don't do when you're thinking about engaging, when you're listening to the history and understanding the context, a bit like what as well Jane was sharing, and how they'd adapted because of the lack of actions. Oh, no worries, Cassandra. I can see you're not able to unmute. We can, I can also see that Hannah's put something, but again, I don't want to put anyone on the spot. I'll stop trying to push everyone to share, but please do take the time to read what you're seeing in the chat. And I'll also now move to if anyone has any questions on anything they've seen in the chat, or either for Jane and Patrick that they'd like to hear more about. And in this one, I would say we might not use the chat because it's a bit harder to follow, but if you want to put your hand up, then while people may be thinking about their questions, I might go back. Do we have Jane still with us maybe to think about? I think like you're saying, Jane, you were saying the voice was getting more vocal from community side. I think you were also talking about how was services changing their approach and the way they were working as well then with community seeing and what you were hearing about that engagement process.
Yeah, I think things I saw, Kay, was around how services were listening to people in the community, and there were different initiatives being designed so services could genuinely hear. They wanted to hear how people wanted to have their voice, and then they were working with people in the community to make decisions and design new services as well. And I think some of the probably key things for me for learning was around being aware of assumptions that we make, assumptions that individually we have, but also that are held within services. And I think, so some of the things that stood out for me was hearing from people around what was important to them and how they wanted to have their voice. And some of the examples when we heard from people who were experiencing financial stress, and they said, engage with us in a location that is friendly and warm and home-like. And they also said it can be an intimidating environment for us, so we want to be able to bring a friend. So I think it's about thinking about those sorts of environments that people say is useful for them to be able to have their voice. And so we saw services engaging in different ways and taking on board what the community was saying about how they wanted to have their say. And so then we saw more people having their say, which was terrific.
Great, Jane. And I think we've got another question here coming in through from Jess about when engaging directly with, and this is to both yourself and Patrick, with community for research and co-design purposes, when engaging directly with community for research and co-design purposes are not appropriate, such as her early example, what other levers might we leverage to support local communities or illuminate more conscious and community-centred pathways? I think it's a really important question because also, I mean, to your fatigue point, communities, there is also limitations to the resources and support for co-design always. So what are some other leverages you've seen work or support? Yeah, jump in, Jane.
Happy to jump in, Kane, and Patrick might have some thoughts as well. But I think what's really important is building on what has already been said. It's important that we do the research, we acknowledge people's voices. So there's a range of different consultations that will happen, and that's what leads to what people talk about consultation fatigue. But it's then the frustration in the community that they're asked the same question and there's no change as a result. So I think it's important to look at what has already been said, do your homework, and it might be that you don't have a new question because the questions have already been answered, and it might be that's a different way of thinking. Okay, we've now got a question that's developed, and that's what we need to ask and get more information from. But I would say the key thing is doing research and look at what has already been said.
Yeah, thank you so much. The research is what made me very hesitant because I saw the contention and the lack of action. So it's such a good point. Thank you so much for that insight.
Patrick or others, did you want to add anything from your experience? I'm sure we've lost.
Just on that point too, as well, is pretty much when you're coming into the community as well. It's intellectual property rights is really a big point too as well. Protecting that for the local mob along those lines, and making sure you get the informed consent processes in place whilst talking to mob too as well, Indigenous groups. So some of the knowledge you might think is sharing is then it's capacity building that organisation to do something further, but how is the reciprocity coming back for those groups too as well? So that's something you need to consider too as well. It's valuing that knowledge within that perspective too as well. You can do the great research over here. You can talk to groups here. You can actually then develop a whole program within that framework, and then all of a sudden that knowledge that they've partaked in that will get lost in terminology. So yeah, so be very mindful of that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patrick. It's such a valid perspective.
Thanks, Patrick. And we've got one incoming from Cassandra for Jane, and then wrap up is, what kind of pre-work did you find helpful with decision makers prior to working with the community to help shift away from that bias of interpreting the information gained as input rather than expertise? Yeah.
We did a lot of work with both hearing from people in the community and also hearing from people within the service system. So one of the priority projects we had was around improving palliative care. And so people in the community said that their experience of palliative care was poor. People who were in the palliative care system were challenged by the conditions in which they were working, so challenged in relation to funding, waiting lists and that sort of thing. So what we found is hearing the experiences from the community and from those within services, and then bringing people together so that then there's that shared understanding, and people then came to solutions together to resolve issues. Another one was in relation to access to doctors, where people in the community wanted to see the same doctor for their lifetime. And the reality is doctors are the same as other professions, where they will change over time. So doctors also wanted to have a solution to that. So we worked with doctors and with the community to provide continuity of care, which didn't necessarily rely on the individual doctor. So I think for me, it's about bringing people together to have the shared understanding, but yes, doing the preparation with people beforehand as well, so they feel heard.
Yeah, that's great. Oh yeah, jump in.
So an example for that for us, for Main Aboriginal Corporation, is basically because we had the 168 kids that we got at the end of the 3-year contract, pretty much. Out of the 168 kids, we only had 3 referrals from the community, from service providers for that. We had the community input that came around behind to provide the youth. They said that, look, take my kids out, please. They need to be away from the streets. They need to be out on country in that instance. So it's about making sure the community is also walking along with you as well within that framework too as well. Yep. So the pre-work is, making sure your community has an understanding of where you sit. Service providers won't support you in some areas too as well. So.
Yeah, and I think that affects like a phrase, right? We're always saying in this is to be going at the pace of community as well and moving there. And so understanding where everyone's at when you're coming at this work is really key. I think, and I do acknowledge that we probably do this at a lunchtime, so lots of people are in open spaces and telling me they can't unmute, but I'm sure would have liked to. So, but thank you for that. And we will put these comments that people are sharing and these examples as well in the wrap up when we do send this out with the recording. And I know some people have wanted to reach out as well to Patrick specifically as well. To talk more about, having some of those difficult conversations and contacts. So we will do that. We'll now be wrapping up, I think, from today's discussion, which I've said was where these elements that we were raising today was really to talk about that something that we know that we're all dealing with in our work and across really various different contexts, to see how can we change the ways that we're working, or what does it mean for the way that we are working to improve and strengthen our initiatives. And so this is really about surfacing that how, and that's what we really want to hear more on, because we know there's this deep desire from other communities that are contacting, or PBIs, place-based initiatives, to say how are others doing this or what. So we hope this can be one of many spaces for sharing. And there is this QR code that we have in the chat for the survey. And like I said, because we're learning and growing, that this is great for us to get feedback and to hear as well what other things might be useful in the work that you're doing, to hear from, and resources. And then I don't think anyone's going to, I'll give you a few minutes to do it, because we know once we walk away from this, no one's going to be able to do it, because we don't have time like that. So we can take that now. And so we'll be having another session there in the next, in a month's time. And so we'll come back as well with that date and send out, like I said, the recordings. There are also, I share on the website various resources and things that we have that look at working with lived experience across different contexts, and some of this on how to take that in. And if there's anything as well that you're coming across, it's always good for us to know about that. So don't hesitate to get in touch. And so with that, I think I'll say thank you. We'll leave this up and we'll have the music playing for a couple of minutes, but really thank you for your time, and to all our excellent speakers today, and for everyone who was sharing their experiences, and to my colleagues, Brenda, for breaking down as well the elements. So thanks everyone, and I hope you have an excellent day.